I came home early on Christmas Eve to surprise them. I froze when I heard my husband yell, "Tiffany is pregnant. We're finally rich." I left silently. 3 weeks later, I served them eviction papers. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, grab a warm cup of tea and get comfortable. I'd love to know what time of day you're watching this video. Please comment M for morning, A for afternoon, or E for evening. Now, let me take you into this story. The snow was coming down hard in Manhattan, coating the streets in a thick, white blanket that muffled the usual roar of the city. I sat in my car parked just down the block from my own brownstone, watching the warm, golden light spill out from the living room windows onto the snowy sidewalk. It looked perfect. It looked like a scene from a holiday movie. My house, the beautiful historic home my parents had left me, was filled with people I considered my family. I checked my watch. It was only 8 p.m. I wasn't supposed to be there until 10. I had left the company Christmas party early. The music was too loud, the conversations were repetitive, and honestly, I just missed my husband. I wanted to surprise Greg. I wanted to walk in, help my mother-in-law, Loretta, with the final touches on dinner, and maybe steal a kiss from my husband under the mistletoe before the rest of the guests arrived. I felt lucky. I felt blessed. I was 28 years old, I had a career that was skyrocketing as a project manager, and I had a family that had taken me in when I had no one. I grabbed my bag, shivering slightly as the icy wind hit my face, and hurried up the steps. I didn't knock. It was my house, after all. I turned the key silently in the lock, wanting to make a grand entrance. I stepped into the foyer, shaking the snow off my coat. The house smelled amazing, roast turkey, cinnamon, and pine. Laughter drifted from the living room. There must have been 20 people in there already. I was about to call out, "Merry Christmas," but something stopped me. It was Greg's voice. It was booming, louder than I had ever heard it, filled with a kind of euphoric triumph. "She's pregnant!" Greg shouted. "Tiffany is pregnant! We're going to have a son!" I froze. My hand was still gripping the lapel of my coat. I stood there in the hallway, hidden by the wall that separated the foyer from the grand living room. The world seemed to stop spinning. Pregnant? A son? I wasn't pregnant. We hadn't even started trying yet. Greg always said we needed to wait, that we needed to be more financially secure, that he wanted his trading career to take off first. I took a step closer, peering through the crack in the slightly ajar double doors. I saw them. Greg was standing in the center of the room, his face flushed with excitement. And wrapped in his arms was Tiffany. Tiffany. My old high school friend. The woman I had helped get a job a few years ago when she was down on her luck. The woman I had invited to BBQs and holiday parties because I felt sorry for her. She was beaming, one hand resting protectively over her stomach, looking up at my husband with adoration. "A son," my father-in-law, Hank, roared, raising his glass of expensive scotch, my scotch. "Finally! A Miller heir!" The room erupted in cheers. My mother-in-law, Loretta, was dabbing at her eyes with a napkin, crying tears of joy. Friends of the family, people I had known for years, were clapping and patting Greg on the back. "But what about Diane?" someone asked from the back of the room. "It was a cousin, I think. Does she know? What happens when she walks through that door?" The room went silent. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like a lifetime. Greg waved his hand dismissively, a smirk playing on his lips. "Don't worry about Diane. She doesn't know yet. And no one says a word tonight, you hear me? I need to get her to sign the paperwork first." "The power of attorney," Loretta said, nodding vigorously. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the festive atmosphere. "You need to make sure she signs that POA, Greg. Once she signs that, we have control of the assets. We can transfer the properties. We can secure the future for Tiffany and the baby. I'm working on it, Mom, Greg said, pulling Tiffany tighter against him. She's trusting. She's naive. She thinks it's just to help me manage the rentals so she can focus on her job. She'll sign it after New Year's. And once the ink is dry, well, we won't have to pretend anymore. Finally, Loretta sighed, looking around my living room with a hungry, possessive glint in her eyes. Finally, my son, after so many years of bowing and scraping to that orphan, we are going to reclaim what is rightfully ours. My stomach turned. Acid rose in my throat. Orphan. That's what she called me. Not daughter-in-law. Not Diane. That orphan. I realized then, with a clarity that was physically painful, that my entire life was a lie. The love, the support, the family dinners, it was all a long con. They didn't love me. They tolerated me because I was the golden goose. They were waiting for the right moment to slit my throat and take the gold. I looked at the power of attorney document Greg had left on the hallway console table earlier that week. He had been so sweet when he gave it to me. It's just to make things easier, honey. So I can handle the boring stuff for you. I had almost signed it this morning. I had the pen in my hand. I backed away slowly. My heart was pounding so hard I thought they would hear it over the Christmas carols playing softly in the background. I couldn't go in there. If I went in there now, I would scream. I would cry. I would give them exactly what they wanted, a breakdown. And I would lose the element of surprise. They thought I was stupid. They thought I was the naive little orphan girl who was just grateful to have a family. They were celebrating their victory before the game had even ended. I gripped the door handle, my knuckles white. I wasn't going to cry. Not yet. I opened the door silently, stepped back out into the biting cold wind, and closed it behind me. I walked back to my car on autopilot. I didn't feel the snow melting on my face or the icy wind cutting through my coat. I felt numb, a deep, paralyzing cold that started in my chest and radiated out to my fingertips. I got into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and just sat there for a moment, staring at the glowing windows of my house. Inside, my husband was toasting his mistress and their unborn child. Inside, the people I called Mom and Dad were plotting to steal my inheritance. I started the engine and drove. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to get away from that house, away from the lies. I drove for blocks, weaving through the Christmas traffic, until the nausea hit me so hard I had to pull over. I barely got the door open in time before I was sick right there in the gutter, retching until there was nothing left but bile and bitterness. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand and leaned my head against the steering wheel, gasping for air. Tears finally came then, hot and angry. How could I have been so blind? I let my mind drift back, forcing myself to look at the past 12 years without the rose-colored glasses of gratitude. I had known Greg my whole life. Our parents were friends. Best friends. But while my parents were successful, my father a brilliant entrepreneur and my mother a renowned architect, Greg's parents, Hank and Loretta, had always struggled. When I was 16, the accident happened. A rainy October night. A truck lost control on the highway. My parents were gone in an instant. I remembered the funeral. I was a child, broken and terrified, standing by the grave in the pouring rain. Hank and Loretta were there, holding umbrellas over me. Loretta had hugged me so tight I couldn't breathe. "We're your family now, Diane," she had whispered. "We won't let you be alone." I had believed her. God, I had believed her. They moved into the brownstone with me. They took over my life. They managed my parents' estate until I turned 21. They were the guardians, the protectors. But now, staring at the dashboard of my car, different memories surfaced. Memories I had suppressed or excused. I remembered the way Loretta used to look at my mother's jewelry box. Not with sadness, but with hunger. I remembered Hank making jokes about how unfair it was that a teenage girl had so much money while hardworking folks like him barely scraped by. I remembered how they encouraged me to date Greg. "You two are perfect for each other," Loretta would say, pushing us together at every opportunity. "It's destiny. You grew up together." When I inherited the portfolio at 21, the 4 condos, the brownstone, the stocks, Hank had sat me down. He had offered to manage it for me. I had politely declined, saying I wanted to learn to do it myself, but I let them stay in the brownstone. I let them live rent-free because I didn't want them to leave. I was afraid of the silence in that big house. Greg and I married 2 years later. It felt natural. Safe. He was the boy next door, the one who knew my history, who knew my pain. On our wedding day, Hank walked me down the aisle. He squeezed my arm and said, "Your father would be proud." I had cried tears of gratitude. Now, I realized that look in his eyes wasn't pride. It was greed. He wasn't walking a daughter down the aisle, he was walking a bank vault. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, making me jump. It was a text from Greg. "Honey, where are you? Everyone is waiting. The turkey is getting cold. Love you." I stared at the screen, reading the words "love you." A lie. Just another brick in the wall of deception they had built around me. He was probably texting me with one hand while holding Tiffany with the other. I didn't reply. I couldn't. If I typed anything, my rage would bleed through the screen. I put the car in gear and pulled back onto the road. I wasn't going back there tonight. I wasn't going to be the victim they expected. They thought I was weak. They thought I was just a lonely orphan desperate for connection. And maybe I had been. But that girl died tonight in the hallway of her own home. I drove downtown, toward the financial district. I needed a place to think. A place where they wouldn't look for me. I checked into a high-end hotel, using a credit card that wasn't linked to our joint account. As I walked into the sterile, quiet hotel room, I caught my reflection in the mirror. My mascara was smeared, my face was pale, and my eyes looked different. The softness was gone. I sat on the edge of the bed and took a deep breath. Greg mentioned the power of attorney. He said he needed me to sign it. That was the key. As long as I hadn't signed that document, I still had control. They were celebrating a victory they hadn't won yet. They wanted my inheritance? They wanted my properties? I pulled my phone out and typed a text to Greg. I had to buy myself time. I had to play the part. "I'm so sorry, honey. I'm stuck at the office party. My boss had a meltdown, and I have to handle it. It's chaos. I might have to stay in the city tonight to prep for a crisis meeting tomorrow. Don't wait up. Merry Christmas to everyone." I hit send. Then I turned off my phone, threw it on the bed, and walked to the window. Manhattan glittered below me, cold and indifferent. "Merry Christmas, Greg," I whispered to the empty room. "Enjoy it. Because it's the last one you'll ever enjoy on my dime." I spent the next 48 hours in that hotel room. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't order room service. I barely slept. I existed in a state of hyperfocus that I usually reserved for high-stakes project launches at work. But this wasn't just a project, this was my survival. I paced the floor, dissecting my marriage with the precision of a surgeon. I needed to understand the extent of the damage. I needed to know exactly how much of a fool I had been. I thought about the rental properties. I had inherited 5 properties in total, the brownstone we lived in and 4 luxury condos in trendy neighborhoods. When we got married, Greg had convinced me that we should live in the brownstone with his parents. They're getting older, Diane, he had said, his eyes full of fake concern. They took care of you when you were helpless. Now we can take care of them. Plus, it's a big house. We'll have plenty of space. I had agreed. I wanted to be a good daughter. Then came the condos. Greg had quit his job at a marketing firm shortly after the wedding to become a day trader. He claimed he could make more money investing our capital. He also offered to manage the tenants for the 4 condos. You work so hard at the firm, babe, he'd said, massaging my shoulders. Let me take this burden off you. I'll collect the rents, handle repairs, and reinvest the profits into our portfolio. We'll be billionaires before we're 40. I had handed it over. I trusted him. He was my husband. I never asked for detailed spreadsheets. I just saw the monthly summaries he created, summaries that always showed maintenance costs and market fluctuations eating up a chunk of the profit, but the numbers looked okay. Now, pacing the hotel room, I realized I hadn't seen an actual bank statement from the rental accounts in years. Greg handled the mail. Greg handled the logins. And then there was the power of attorney. I opened my laptop and pulled up a digital copy of the document Greg had emailed me for review last week. I read it slowly, forcing myself to understand the legalese I usually glossed over. Granting full authority to sell, transfer, mortgage, or liquidate any and all real estate assets, unrestricted access to all banking and investment accounts. It wasn't a limited power of attorney for management purposes. It was a blank check. If I signed this, Greg could legally sell my condos, empty my trust fund, and transfer the brownstone into his name, or his parents' names, without me being able to stop him until it was too late. He was going to steal everything. And then, he was going to discard me for Tiffany and their heir. A chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the hotel air conditioning. They had planned this. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment affair. You don't draft a POA like this overnight. This was a conspiracy. I grabbed a notepad from the hotel nightstand and started making a list. My hand shook, but my writing was firm. Step 1, secure the assets. Step 2, gather evidence. Step 3, cut the cash flow. Step 4, evict the parasites. I looked at the list. It seemed impossible. They were in my house. They had access to my files. But they made one fatal mistake: they assumed I was weak. I turned my phone back on for a brief moment to check my messages. Dozens of texts from Greg. Diane, where are you? Mom is worried. Are you okay? Call me. We missed you yesterday. When are you coming home? He wasn't worried about me. He was worried about the signature. He was worried that his plan was hitting a snag. I sent a quick, breezy reply, so sorry. The project crisis is worse than I thought. I have to fly to our satellite office in Jersey for a few days to put out fires. I'll be totally unreachable. Don't worry about me, just hold down the fort. Love you. I turned the phone off again immediately. The lie bought me time. They would believe it because Diane the workaholic was a character they knew well. They relied on my work ethic to fund their lifestyle, so they wouldn't question me working through the holidays. Now, I needed a weapon. And I knew exactly who to call. Mr. Reynolds. He had been my father's lawyer for 30 years. A shark in a suit who had terrified me when I was a child because he never smiled. After my parents died, he had tried to warn me about letting Hank and Loretta have too much control, but I was 16 and grieving, and I had pushed him away. I had even switched to a different, friendlier law firm recommended by Hank for my day-to-day legal needs. I had been such a fool. Mr. Reynolds wasn't mean, he was protective. I found his number online. It was Sunday, December 26th. His office would be closed. But I remembered my father telling me once, Reynolds never stops working. If you're in trouble, really in trouble, you call his private line. I dialed the number. It rang 4 times. Reynolds speaking, a gruff voice answered. Mr. Reynolds, I said, my voice finally breaking for the first time in 2 days. It's Diane. Diane Sterling. James Sterling's daughter. There was a pause. Diane. I haven't heard your voice in years. Is everything all right? No, I said, gripping the phone. No, Mr. Reynolds. Everything is wrong. They're trying to take everything. And I think they've been planning it since the day my parents died. Come to my office tomorrow morning at 7 a.m., he said instantly. Bring everything you have. Monday morning, the city was slowly waking up from its Christmas slumber. I walked into the old brick building in the financial district where Mr. Reynolds had his office. The lobby smelled of floor wax and old money. I took the elevator to the 14th floor, my heart hammering against my ribs. Mr. Reynolds was waiting for me. He looked older than I remembered, his hair completely white now, but his eyes were just as sharp behind his wire-rimmed glasses. He didn't offer a hug or empty platitudes. He just pointed to the leather chair opposite his massive mahogany desk. Sit, he said. Talk. I told him everything. I told him about the party, the overheard conversation, the pregnancy, the power of attorney. I told him about the rental properties Greg managed. I spoke for 20 minutes without stopping. When I finished, Mr. Reynolds leaned back in his chair, tenting his fingers. He was silent for a long time. I tried to tell your father, he said softly, almost to himself. Tell him what? I asked. Mr. Reynolds stood up and walked to a filing cabinet. He pulled out a dusty, yellowed folder. Diane, you know that Hank and your father were friends. But do you know about the business they started together in the early 90s? I shook my head. I thought they were just childhood buddies. They were partners in an import business, Mr. Reynolds explained, placing the file in front of me. It struggled in the beginning. Hank panicked. He wanted out. He demanded your father buy his shares. Your father tried to convince him to stay, told him the market would turn, but Hank insisted. He called your father a dreamer and a fool. So, James bought him out. He took out a second mortgage on the brownstone to pay Hank off. I opened the file. I saw old legal documents, signatures and fading ink. 6 months later, Reynolds continued, the market turned. The business exploded. Your father became a millionaire within 2 years. Hank spent his buyout money on bad investments and cars. He watched your family rise while he stayed stagnant. He was jealous, I whispered. It was more than jealousy, Diane. It was hatred, Reynolds said grimly. Hank sued your father twice, claiming he was tricked into selling his shares. I crushed those lawsuits in court because they were baseless. But Hank never let it go. He believed your father stole his destiny. He believed your family's wealth was rightfully his. I felt the blood drain from my face. So when my parents died, Hank saw an opportunity, Reynolds finished. He didn't take you in out of charity. He took you in to get close to the money he believed he was owed. He couldn't get it from James, so he decided to get it from James's daughter. The cruelty of it took my breath away. All those years of family dinners, of calling me daughter, it was all a long game of retribution. I wasn't a person to them. I was a vessel returning their stolen gold. And Greg? I asked, though I already knew the answer. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. He was raised on this narrative. Raised to believe you were the usurper and he was the rightful heir. Mr. Reynolds sat back down and looked me in the eye. Now, let's talk about the law. You are in a dangerous position, but not a hopeless one. Did you sign the POA? No. Good. That saves us. Now, what about the assets? Are the properties in your name? Yes, but Greg manages them. The income goes into, well, I assumed it went into our joint account, but looking at the numbers now, it doesn't add up. Inheritance is separate property, Reynolds stated firmly. As long as you didn't commingle the funds, meaning, as long as you didn't put his name on the deeds or deposit the inheritance money into a joint account, he has no claim to the principal assets in a divorce. However, the income generated during the marriage, that's trickier. But if he diverted it without your knowledge, that's theft. That's fraud. He pulled out a legal pad. We need to go on the offensive. First, we revoke any access he has. Second, we audit everything. Third, we file for divorce on the grounds of adultery and fraud. I want to ruin them, I said, the words tasting like metal in my mouth. I don't just want a divorce, Mr. Reynolds. I want them to feel what I felt. I want them homeless. I want them to lose everything they tried to steal. Mr. Reynolds smiled then. It was a terrifying, shark-like smile. Your father would be proud of you right now. Let's get to work. We spent the rest of the morning drafting documents. But the real shock came when we pulled the property records for the 4 condos. Diane, Mr. Reynolds said, pointing at the screen. Look at Unit 4B on the Upper West Side. I looked. The tenant listed was MT Holdings. I don't recognize that company, I said. Let's look at the payment history. Mr. Reynolds clicked a few keys. There were 0 payments recorded for the last 12 months. Who lives in 4B? Reynolds asked. I thought about it. Greg always said that tenant was difficult but paid in cash sometimes. Then it hit me. Tiffany posted a photo on Instagram a few months ago. A view of the park. A view that looked exactly like the view from Unit 4B. Tiffany, I said, my voice trembling with rage. His mistress is living in my condo. Rent-free. So, Reynolds said, cracking his knuckles. He's using your property to house his mistress while plotting to steal the rest. That is not just grounds for divorce, Diane. That is criminal embezzlement. I want them out, I said. All of them. We will get them out, Reynolds promised. But we need undeniable proof. We need to catch them red-handed. We need to trace every single dollar. I can get the proof, I said, a plan forming in my mind. I'm going back there. Reynolds frowned. It's dangerous. I have to, I said. They think I'm in Jersey. If I go back home and act like nothing is wrong, they'll get sloppy. They'll talk. And I'll be listening. Leaving Mr. Reynolds' office, I felt a strange sense of calm. It was the calm of a soldier who had received their mission orders. I wasn't just a victim anymore, I was an operative. My first stop was a private investigation firm Mr. Reynolds recommended. I handed over a check that made my stomach clench, but I knew it was necessary. I gave the investigator, a stern woman named Sarah, everything: Greg's license plate number, Tiffany's full name, photos of Hank and Loretta. I want everything, I told her. Bank accounts, gambling records, hotel stays. If he bought a stick of gum with my money, I want to know about it. Sarah nodded. If he's a traitor like you say, there will be a paper trail. These guys always think they're smarter than the system. They're not. Next, I went to the bank. Not the branch near my house, but the main headquarters. I sat down with a senior relationship manager. Because the initial inheritance was in a trust that Mr. Reynolds had set up years ago, I had leverage. We pulled the records for the rental income. It was worse than I thought. Greg hadn't just been skimming off the top, he had been diverting the entire rental income from 3 of the condos into a separate account under the name Miller Investments. An account I didn't have access to. Can you see the outflows from that account? I asked the manager. I can't give you the full statement since your name isn't on it, the manager said apologetically. But I can see transfers. Are there transfers to betting sites? The manager hesitated, then nodded slightly. There is significant activity related to online gaming platforms and large cash withdrawals at casinos in Atlantic City. How much? Over the last 3 years, approximately $280,000. I closed my eyes. Nearly $300,000. My parents' hard-earned money. The legacy they left for me. He had gambled it away. He wasn't investing. He wasn't building a future. He was an addict, and I was his bankroll. And the fourth condo. Unit 4B. I looked at the lease agreement Greg had forged. MT Holdings. Madison Tiffany? No, maybe Tiffany Marie? It didn't matter. It was a shell. He was letting her live in $1 million apartment for free while my maintenance costs on that unit skyrocketed. I left the bank shaking with adrenaline. I had the financial smoking gun. Now I needed the confession. I drove back to the hotel and prepared for my return. I needed to look tired, stressed from work, but still the loving, oblivious wife. I practiced my smile in the mirror. It didn't reach my eyes, but it didn't need to. Greg never looked closely at my eyes anyway. I also ordered some equipment online. Tiny, motion-activated cameras. Voice recorders. They would be delivered to my office tomorrow. The plan was simple but brutal. I would go home. I would tell them a lie that would threaten their financial supply. I would watch them panic. And when they panicked, they would reveal everything. I texted Greg one last time before bed. Heading home tomorrow morning. Crisis managed, mostly. Can't wait to see you. He replied instantly. Thank God. We missed you. Hurry home. He didn't miss me. He missed the signature on the power of attorney. The next morning, I checked out of the hotel. I put on my work armor, my sharpest blazer and heels. I drove the familiar route to the brownstone. The snow had turned to gray slush, fitting for the mood. As I pulled up to the curb, I saw Greg's car in the driveway. And next to it, Hank's beat-up sedan. They were all there. Waiting. I took a deep breath, clutching the steering wheel. This was the hardest performance of my life. I had to walk into that house, hug the man who betrayed me, smile at the people who wanted me dead, and not vomit in their faces. I grabbed my suitcase and walked up the steps. I unlocked the door. Honey? Is that you? Greg's voice called out from the kitchen. It's me. I called back, injecting a false cheerfulness into my voice. Greg appeared in the hallway. He looked tired, unshaven. He ran to me and enveloped me in a hug. I held my breath, revulsion sweeping over me. He smelled of stale coffee and, was that Tiffany's perfume? I was so worried, he mumbled into my hair. I'm fine, I said, pulling away gently. Just exhausted. Work was a nightmare. Loretta and Hank came out of the kitchen, mugs of coffee in hand. Diane! You poor thing, Loretta cooed, though her eyes immediately darted to my hand, looking for the POA document. Working on Christmas. It's a sin. It pays the bills, I said, forcing a smile. Actually, that reminds me. I have some news. Big news. The three of them froze. What news? Hank asked, his eyes narrowing. I made a decision while I was in Jersey, I said, walking past them into the living room and dropping my bag. I realized I've been putting too much pressure on you, Greg. Managing the rentals, dealing with tenants, it's taking you away from your trading. And since my workload is doubling next year, I decided to simplify our lives. Greg looked nervous. Simplify? How? I turned to them, beaming. I hired a professional property management firm this morning. They take over everything starting January 1st. They'll collect rents, handle repairs, everything. You won't have to lift a finger anymore, Greg. You can focus 100% on your stocks. The silence in the room was deafening. You could hear a pin drop. Greg's face went pale. You what? I hired a management company, I repeated. Isn't that great? It's a gift, really. To give you your time back. But... Greg stammered, looking at Hank, panic rising in his eyes. But I like managing the properties. I'm good at it. I know, honey, but you're always stressed about it. And honestly, this firm guarantees a higher return. They're very aggressive with late payments and evictions. I paused for effect. Especially evictions. I saw Hank swallow hard. Loretta looked like she was about to faint. I had just cut off their oxygen. The rental money was gone. Tiffany's free ride was about to end. I think we should discuss this, Greg said, his voice rising an octave. Oh, it's already done, I said breezily. I signed the contract this morning. They're sending out notices to all tenants today. Anyway, I'm starving. Is there any leftover turkey? I walked into the kitchen, leaving them standing in the hallway, looking like three people who had just watched their winning lottery ticket catch fire. The game was on. I stood in the kitchen, casually making a sandwich, while my ears strained to hear the frantic whispering in the living room. They were trying to be quiet, but panic makes people loud. What do we do? I heard Greg hiss. She signed a contract. They're going to contact the tenants. That means they'll contact the tenant in 4B, Hank growled. They'll find out Tiffany isn't paying rent. They'll evict her. And the money, Greg? Loretta's voice was a sharp whisper. How are we going to pay the mortgage on this house? You said the rental income covered our expenses. I suppressed a smile as I spread mustard on my bread. They were already turning on each other. I'll fix it, Greg said, though he sounded desperate. I'll talk to her. I'll convince her to cancel the contract. I just need time. You don't have time, Hank snapped. January 1st is in 5 days. If that company takes over, they'll audit the books. They'll see the missing money. I walked back into the living room, sandwich in hand, and they immediately stopped talking. They plastered fake smiles on their faces so quickly it was almost comical. So, Greg said, coming over to massage my shoulders, a gesture that now made my skin crawl. About this management company, don't you think it's a waste of money? Their fees are usually high. I was doing it for free. Oh, their fee is only 8%, I lied. And since they predict they can raise rents by 20% across the board, we'll actually make more money. It's a no-brainer. Raise rents? Loretta squeaked. Yes. Market rates have skyrocketed, I said innocently. We've been undercharging for years. Especially that Unit 4B. The manager told me that tenant is paying practically nothing. We're going to double the rent or get them out. Greg looked like he was going to be sick. Right. Right. Good business sense, honey. I'm going to take a nap, I announced. Traveling wiped me out. I went upstairs to our bedroom, the master suite that I paid for, in the house that I owned. I closed the door and locked it. But I didn't nap. I opened the package that had arrived at my office and I had smuggled in inside my suitcase. I took out the tiny cameras. They were no bigger than a die. I waited until I heard Greg go downstairs to argue with his parents again. I slipped out of the room. I worked quickly and silently. I placed one camera on top of the bookshelf in the hallway, hidden behind a decorative vase. I placed another in the living room, tucked into the leaves of a large potted plant. I put a voice recorder under the entryway console table where they often stood to talk. I didn't dare put one in the kitchen yet, too risky while they were all down there. But I managed to plant one in Greg's home office on my way back. I returned to the bedroom, heart pounding. I checked the app on my phone. The feeds were live. Crystal clear video and audio. I saw them huddled in the living room. "She's getting smarter," Hank was saying, pacing the rug. "Why did she do this now? Out of the blue?" "She said she wants to simplify," Greg said, head in his hands. "She thinks she's helping me." "Helping you?" Loretta scoffed. "She's cutting your balls off, Greg. Without that rental money, how are you going to pay your gambling debts? How are you going to give Tiffany the allowance you promised?" "Shut up, Mom!" Greg shouted. "I know. I need to get her to sign the POA. If she signs the POA, I can fire the management company. I can override her decisions. Then make her sign it." Hank yelled. "Tonight. Stop pussyfooting around. Use the charm. Use the guilt. Tell her I'm sick. Tell her anything. Just get that signature." "And if she doesn't sign?" Loretta asked, her voice dropping to a sinister tone. "She will," Greg said. "She loves me. She trusts me." I watched them on the screen, a cold fury settling in my chest. She loves me. She trusts me. Those were the weapons he used against me. He weaponized my love. I laid on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Tonight, he would try to charm me. He would try to seduce me into signing away my life. I needed to be ready. I needed to escalate the pressure. That evening, dinner was tense. I kept up the chatter about my successful trip to Jersey. Greg poured me wine, too much wine. He kept refilling my glass. "You know, honey," Greg said after dinner, sliding the familiar document across the table. "With this new management company and your promotion, maybe we should just get this POA out of the way? It would really let me handle the transition with the new firm so you don't have to be bothered with the emails." I looked at the paper. Then I looked at him. I smiled, a sleepy, wine-induced smile. "You're so right, babe," I said. "I should just sign it." Greg's eyes lit up. Hank leaned forward. Loretta stopped breathing. I picked up the pen. I hovered it over the signature line. I watched them practically salivate. Then I dropped the pen. Oh, shoot. My hand is so cramped from typing all week. And you know what? I promised Mr. Reynolds, my dad's old lawyer, that I'd let him scan any legal docs before I sign them. Just a formality. I'd hate to upset him. I'll drop it by his office tomorrow and sign it then. The disappointment in the room was palpable. It was like the air had been sucked out. "Mr. Reynolds?" Hank asked, his voice tight. "Is he still practicing? He must be senile by now." "Sharp as a tack," I said. "He actually called me yesterday to check in. He's very protective." I saw Hank exchange a terrified look with Loretta. Mentioning Reynolds was a calculated move. It told them I had backup. It made them paranoid. "I'll do it tomorrow," I promised, standing up. "I'm going to bed." "Coming, honey?" Greg looked at the unsigned document, then at me. "Yeah. I'll be up in a minute." I went upstairs, leaving the document on the table. I checked the camera app. "Reynolds knows," Hank whispered furiously as soon as I was gone. If she takes that POA to Reynolds, he'll tell her not to sign it. He knows about our history. We can't let her take it to him, Loretta said. We have to do something drastic, Greg said. We need to get her out of the way. Maybe she needs to go on another trip? A longer one? Or maybe, Hank said, she has a breakdown. The stress of the job. She gets committed. I become her guardian. I shivered. They were escalating. I had to move fast. The next 2 days were a game of cat and mouse. I went to work as usual, but I wasn't working. I was sitting in my office with the door locked, glued to the camera feeds from my house. It was infuriating. And enlightening. I watched how they lived when I wasn't there. For years, I had believed they were humble, helpful people. Loretta always claimed she spent her days cleaning and cooking. Hank said he was fixing up the house. The reality was disgusting. At 10 a.m. on a Tuesday, Hank was sprawled on my Italian leather sofa, watching soap operas with the volume blaring. He was eating chips, wiping his greasy hands on the cushions, my cushions. Get me another beer, Lori, he shouted toward the kitchen. Loretta waddled in, wearing one of my silk robes. Get it yourself, you old goat. Where's the boy? Hank asked. Upstairs. Talking to her, Loretta sneered. I switched the camera feed to the upstairs landing. Greg was on the phone, pacing nervously. Tiffany, baby, please stop crying, Greg was saying. I know the eviction notice is scary. It's a mistake. I'm going to fix it. No, I can't send you $5,000 right now. Diane locked the credit cards. She said there was fraud activity. I can't ask her to unlock them without raising suspicion. He paused, listening to Tiffany scream on the other end. I am not useless. Greg shouted back. I am the one doing all the work here. I'm the one sleeping with her. Do you know how hard it is to pretend to love her? She's so boring. She's so plain compared to you. I flinched. Boring. Plain. I looked down at myself. I was fit, I dressed well, I was intelligent. But to him, I was just a boring paycheck. Just hold on a few more days, Greg pleaded. Once I get the POA, I'll transfer the deed of the condo to your name. Then she can't evict you. It'll be your house. I gasped. He wasn't just going to let her live there, he was going to give her my property. $1 million asset, handed over to his mistress. I switched back to the living room feed. Loretta was rummaging through my purse that I had accidentally left on the table. It was an old one, empty except for some decoy lipstick. Cheap, she muttered, tossing it aside. Then she walked over to the mantel and picked up a framed photo of my parents. She stared at it for a moment, then spat on the glass. Look at you, she hissed at the photo of my dead mother. Thinking you were better than us. Look who's living in your house now, Isabel. Look who's eating off your silver. She wiped the spit with her sleeve and put the photo back. My hands were shaking so hard I had to grip the edge of my desk. These weren't just bad people. They were monsters. They hated me. They hated my parents. They felt entitled to my life because of a 30-year-old grudge I had nothing to do with. I couldn't just divorce Greg. I couldn't just kick them out. They would come back. They would sue. They would harass me. I needed to destroy them. I needed to catch them committing a felony. I called Mr. Reynolds. I have recordings, I told him. Greg promising to transfer the deed to his mistress. Hank talking about getting me committed. Is that enough? It's good, Reynolds said. But for the criminal charges, the fraud, the embezzlement, we need them to admit to the theft. Or we need to catch them trying to access your assets illegally. I have an idea, I said. They're desperate for money. Greg is cut off. Tiffany is facing eviction. If I leave again, if I create a vacuum, they'll make a move. What kind of move? They'll try to rob me, I said. Or forge the signature. If they forge the signature on the POA and try to use it, that's a felony, Reynolds confirmed. But Diane, you can't be there. It's too volatile. I won't be there, I said. I'm going to Japan. Japan? A business trip. A long one. I'll leave the house to them. I'll make sure they feel safe. And I'll be watching every second. I hung up and started planning. I needed a decoy. I needed to make them believe I was gone for at least a week. That would give them enough rope to hang themselves. I went home early that day. I brought sushi, ironic, considering my lie. Hey, everyone, I announced, walking in. They scrambled to look busy. Hank hid the beer can. Loretta pulled off my robe and threw it behind the sofa. I have crazy news, I said, looking distressed. The company is sending me to Tokyo. Tomorrow. For 10 days. 10 days? Greg asked, and I saw the hope flare in his eyes instantly. Yes. It's a huge merger. I have to go close the deal. I leave at 5 a.m. Oh, honey, that's terrible, Greg said, trying to hide his smile. But, you have to do what you have to do. I know. I'm going to go pack, I said. I'll be so busy I probably won't be able to call much. The time difference is a killer. Don't worry about a thing, Loretta said, her eyes gleaming. We'll take care of the house. I know you will, I said. I went upstairs and started packing a suitcase. But I also did something else. I went to the wall safe in the closet. I acted like I was checking its contents. I knew Greg was watching from the doorway. Just grabbing my passport, I said. I punched in the code, my birthday. Greg knew it. Inside the safe were the deeds to the properties, my expensive jewelry, and some cash. You should probably leave the jewelry here, Greg suggested. You don't want to lose it in Tokyo. Good idea, I said. I put the jewelry box back. Later, when he was in the shower, I changed the code. I changed it to the date my parents died. A date he should know, but I knew he didn't care enough to remember. I also took the spare key to his car and slipped it into my lining of my suitcase. I was leaving them in a house with no money, a locked safe full of treasure they couldn't reach, and a mistress demanding payment. It was going to be a bloodbath. The alarm went off at 4 a.m. It was pitch black outside. I rolled out of bed, adrenaline pumping through my veins like rocket fuel. This was it. The trap was set. Greg groaned and rolled over. Do you really have to go? He mumbled, putting on a weak performance of a husband who would miss his wife. Millions of dollars on the line, babe, I whispered, kissing his forehead. Go back to sleep. I showered quickly, dressed in my travel clothes, and grabbed my large suitcase. I made a show of checking my phone in the hallway, loud enough for him to hear. Yes, the driver is downstairs. I'm coming. There was no driver. I had ordered an Uber to take me 3 blocks away to the same hotel I stayed at before. Before I left, I did one last sweep. Cameras were active. Audio was clear. The safe was locked with the new code. The power of attorney document was accidentally left on the desk in the study, a tempting piece of paper just waiting for a signature. I also left a folder on the kitchen counter labeled Life Insurance and Trust Fund Updates, Confidential. Inside, I had placed fake documents showing that my life insurance policy had been increased to $5 million, with Greg as the sole beneficiary if we were still married at the time of death. It was a dark bait, but I needed to see how far they would go. Would they settle for the theft? Or would they consider removal? I walked out the door into the cold morning air. I didn't look back at the brownstone. I got into the Uber. LaGuardia Airport, the driver asked. Actually, change of plans, I said. Take me to the Marriott downtown. I checked into the hotel suite, my command center. I set up my laptop, connecting it to the secure server where the camera feeds were stored. I ordered a pot of coffee. At 7 a.m., the house woke up. I watched Greg come downstairs. He didn't look sad. He looked ecstatic. He practically danced into the kitchen. She's gone, he shouted. Mom! Dad! She's gone for 10 days. Loretta came shuffling in, grinning. 10 days? That's plenty of time. Call Tiffany, Hank said, rubbing his hands together. Tell her to come over. We need to celebrate. And we need to figure out how to get into that safe. The safe? Greg asked. The jewelry, you idiot, Hank said. That pearl necklace alone is worth 20 grand. We can pawn it to pay off your bookie and get Tiffany off your back for a month. My hand flew to my mouth. They were going to pawn my mother's pearls. The pearls she wore on her wedding day. The pearls she was wearing in the portrait that hung in the hallway. Greg pulled out his phone. Hey, baby. Good news. The witch is gone. Tokyo. Yeah, 10 days. Pack a bag. Come over. We have the whole house to ourselves. He hung up and looked at his parents. Tiffany is coming. Be nice to her. As long as she doesn't eat all the food, Loretta grumbled. Now, Hank said, walking toward the study. Let's find that power of attorney. And let's find that safe combination. I watched as they marched into the study. Greg went straight to the safe. He punched in my birthday. Beep. 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 Error. He frowned. He tried again. Beep. 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 Error. What the hell? Greg said. She changed it. Try again. Hank barked. I tried. It's not opening. Greg kicked the wall. She must have changed it before she left. Why would she do that? Maybe she suspects something, Loretta said, her voice trembling. She doesn't suspect anything, Greg insisted. She's just paranoid about security. She probably set it to something random. Well, break it open, Hank said. It's a titanium wall safe, Dad. We can't just crowbar it open without destroying the wall and making noise. The neighbors will hear. Damn it! Hank slammed his fist on the desk. Then his eyes fell on the folder I had left on the counter. The life insurance folder. He picked it up. He opened it. I zoomed in with the camera. I saw his eyes widen as he read the fake figure. $5 million, Hank whispered. What? Greg asked. Her life insurance, Hank said, holding up the paper. It's $5 million. And you're the beneficiary. The three of them stared at each other. The greed in the room was so thick it distorted the air. 5 million, Loretta repeated. Plus the properties. Plus the stocks. If she doesn't come back from Tokyo. Hank started, his voice low. Don't say that, Greg said, looking nervous. That's crazy. Is it? Hank challenged. She's in a foreign country. Accidents happen. Food poisoning. Traffic accidents. Or, Loretta said, when she comes back, maybe she has an accident here. Down the stairs? She's clumsy. I sat in my hotel room, my blood running cold. They weren't just thieves. They were contemplating murder. I hit the record button on my software, ensuring every syllable was captured in high definition. "Let's not talk about that yet," Greg said, though he didn't say no. He just said not yet. "Let's focus on the POA. She left it right here on the desk." He picked up the power of attorney. "Can you forge her signature?" Hank asked. "I've been practicing," Greg said. He grabbed a pen. "I can make it look close enough. And since Reynolds isn't scanning it, we can just file it with the county clerk directly. By the time she gets back, the brownstone will be in my name." "Do it," Hank commanded. Greg sat down. He put the pen to the paper. This was it. The moment of the crime. Forgery. Fraud. Attempted grand larceny. I watched the pen touch the paper. I watched him sign my name. Diane Sterling. "Done," Greg said, holding it up. "We own her." "We own her," Loretta echoed. I leaned back in my chair, a dark smile forming on my lips. They thought they owned me. But they had just signed their own arrest warrants. Just then, the doorbell rang on the video feed. Greg jumped up. That must be Tiffany. He ran to the door and opened it. Tiffany stood there, looking heavily pregnant and heavily annoyed, dragging a Louis Vuitton suitcase, bought with my money. "Finally," she said, pushing past him. "I'm starving. And this baby needs AC." "Welcome home, honey," Greg said, kissing her. "The house is ours." I watched them settle in. Tiffany on my sofa. Greg pouring my wine. Hank and Loretta fawning over the mistress. They were celebrating. They were comfortable. It was time to let them simmer for a few days. Let them feel safe. Let them dig the hole deeper. But I wasn't just going to watch. I was going to play with them. I picked up my phone. I waited until I saw Greg sit down with a glass of champagne. Then I sent a text. "Landed in Tokyo. Safe and sound. Miss you already. By the way, did I leave the spare car key on the counter? I can't find mine." I watched on the screen as Greg checked his pockets, then the counter, then the hook by the door. "Where are my keys?" he muttered. "She took the spare?" He ran to the window to look at his car. He patted his pockets. "She took the spare key," he told the room. "And I can't find my main set." "You lost them?" Tiffany snapped. "Great. So we're stuck here?" "I'll find them," Greg said, dropping to his knees to look under the sofa. I laughed in the hotel room. "No, you won't, Greg. You're not going anywhere. You're trapped in that house with your parents, your mistress, and your lies. And I'm the one holding the keys." I sat in that hotel room, my eyes glued to the laptop screen, watching my own home being defiled. It was like watching a horror movie where you know the monster is in the house, but the victims are actually the villains, and you're rooting for the house to eat them alive. With the car keys missing and no way to easily leave without spending money on Ubers, money they didn't have, they decided to hunker down. Greg, ever the optimist when it came to spending other people's resources, decided to throw a victory party. "We have the house," Greg announced, popping open a bottle of my vintage Dom Perignon, a bottle my father had saved for a special occasion that never came. "We have the liquor cabinet. We have the food. Who needs to go out?" I watched as Tiffany raided my closet. She came downstairs wearing my emerald green silk robe, the one I bought in Italy on my honeymoon. She was draped in my jewelry, the pieces I hadn't managed to lock away. She looked around my living room with a sneer. "We're going to have to redecorate," she said, running a hand over my velvet armchair. "This whole place smells like old money. It's too stuffy. I want something modern." White leather. Glass tables. You can have whatever you want, babe, Greg promised, pouring champagne into my crystal flutes. Once the deed is transferred, we'll gut the place. Loretta was in the kitchen, cooking up a storm using the expensive steaks I had in the freezer. Hank was already drunk, slumped in my father's reading chair, his feet on the coffee table. They ate like animals. Grease on their chins, crumbs falling onto the Persian rug. They laughed about me. They mocked the way I dressed, the way I talked, how desperate I was for their approval. Did you see her face when she left for Japan? Loretta cackled, her mouth full of steak. Oh, I'll miss you guys so much. Stupid girl. She really thinks we care. She's a cash cow, Hank grunted. That's all she ever was. A cash cow that James left behind for us to milk. But as the night wore on and the alcohol flowed, the conversation took a darker turn. The euphoria of the forgery wore off, and the reality of their situation set in. What if she comes back early? Tiffany asked suddenly, looking at the fake power of attorney lying on the table. What if she checks the bank accounts while she's in Tokyo? She won't, Greg said, though he looked unsure. She's busy working. But what if she does? Tiffany pressed. If she finds out, she'll divorce you. She'll kick us out. And I am not going back to my parents' house, Greg. I'm not raising this baby in a trailer. She can't divorce me if she's dead, Hank muttered. The room went silent. I leaned closer to my laptop screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. What did you say, Dad? Greg asked, his voice low. Hank sat up, his eyes glassy but serious. He picked up the life insurance folder I had planted. $5 million, Greg. Plus the real estate. Plus the stocks. If she divorces you, you get half at best, and that's if we can hide the embezzlement. But if she dies, you get it all. Tax-free. Dad, are you talking about killing her? Greg whispered. I'm talking about securing our future, Hank said. She's clumsy. Everyone knows that. What if she has an accident when she gets back? A fall down those steep stairs? A gas leak? Or maybe she just never comes back from Japan. People disappear in foreign countries all the time. That's risky, Loretta said. But she wasn't saying no. She was calculating. How would we do it? We could tamper with the brakes on her car, Hank suggested. Or maybe something simpler. Carbon monoxide. Tragic. Invisible. I watched Greg. My husband. The man who had vowed to protect me. I waited for him to shout, to throw them out, to say, "Are you crazy? That's my wife." Instead, Greg took a sip of champagne and looked at Tiffany's stomach. $5 million, Greg murmured. That would set us up for life. No more trading. No more pretending. Think about your son, Greg, Tiffany whispered, stroking his arm. Don't you want him to have the best? Don't you want him to have everything she has? Greg looked at her. Then he looked at his parents. We'd have to be careful, Greg said softly. It would have to look like a complete accident. My blood ran cold. I stopped breathing. The air in the hotel room felt suddenly thin. They weren't just thieves. They weren't just liars. They were conspiring to murder me. My husband was discussing my death as a business transaction to benefit his mistress. Tragedy struck me then, not as sadness, but as a lightning bolt of clarity. They didn't see me as a human being. To them, I was an obstacle. A walking ATM machine that had outlived its usefulness. I reached up and touched my own throat, feeling my pulse. I was alive. And I was going to stay that way. But the Diane they knew? She was dead. They had killed her right then and there. My hands shook as I reached for the mouse to stop the recording. I had it. I had the conspiracy to commit murder. This wasn't just civil court anymore. This was prison. If you are listening to this, and you feel that chill running down your spine, please, stop what you are doing. If you have ever felt betrayed, if you are with me in this hotel room right now, please hit the like button and comment the number 1 below. Let me know you are here. Let me know I am not alone in this fight. Your support is the only thing keeping me sane right now. Please, comment 1 so I can see you, and then, listen closely to what I did next. I saved the file. I backed it up to 3 different cloud servers. Then I emailed it to Mr. Reynolds with the subject line, Urgent, Evidence of Conspiracy to Commit Murder. I closed the laptop. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark, watching the city lights, planning my resurrection. The next morning, the sun rose over a city that felt different to me. It was no longer my home, it was a battlefield. But I had the high ground. While the Miller family slept off their champagne hangovers in my brownstone, thinking they were the kings of the castle, the real world was about to come knocking. It started at 9 a.m. I switched on the audio feed while I drank my coffee. The house was quiet until the doorbell rang. Greg stumbled down the stairs in his boxers to answer it. It was a courier. Delivery for occupant of Unit 4B. Oh, wait, forwarding address says here, the courier mumbled, handing Greg a thick envelope. Greg tore it open. It was from the property management company I had hired. It was an eviction notice for Tiffany. What is this? Tiffany screeched, coming down the stairs wrapped in my sheets. Greg. They're evicting me. They're giving me 3 days to pay 12 months of back rent or vacate. 3 days? Greg stared at the paper. That's impossible. Legally they have to give 30 days. Read the fine print, Tiffany yelled. It says squatter rights do not apply due to fraudulent lease agreement. Greg, they know. They know the lease is fake. Calm down, Greg said, his hands shaking. I'll handle it. I'll just transfer money from our joint account to pay it for now. Just to shut them up until the POA goes through. He pulled out his phone and opened his banking app. I watched the color drain from his face in real time. Access denied, he whispered. What? It says. Account frozen. Suspicious activity. Try the credit card. Loretta yelled from the living room. Greg scrambled to find his wallet. He called the number on the back of his Platinum Amex, my Platinum Amex. I listened to his side of the conversation. Yes, this is Greg Miller. My card was declined. What do you mean reported stolen? My wife is in Japan. No, I can't put her on the line. Fraud investigation? But I need to buy groceries. He slammed the phone down. She locked the cards. All of them. How? Hank asked, walking in looking disheveled. She's in Tokyo. She must have set up a fraud alert before she left, Greg said, panic rising in his voice. We have no access. The joint checking, the savings, the credit cards. It's all locked. So we have no money? Tiffany asked, her voice turning icy. Greg. I need prenatal vitamins. I need food. I need to pay for my storage unit. I have $50 in my wallet, Greg said weakly. $50? Tiffany laughed, a harsh, cruel sound. You promised me millions, Greg. You said we were rich. We are rich. Greg shouted, waving the forged POA. As soon as I file this with the county clerk, we own the building. We just need to survive a few days until she gets back or until the paperwork clears. I'm not living on ramen noodles for a week. Tiffany screamed. You said you were a man. fix this." The tension in the house was palpable. The happy family facade was cracking under the pressure of poverty. It's amazing how quickly love evaporates when the credit card is declined. Later that afternoon, the situation got worse. The property management company, following my strict instructions, relayed via Mr. Reynolds, sent a maintenance crew to inspect the Brownstone 4 emergency gas line repairs. I watched on the camera as two burly men in overalls banged on the door. "We need to check the basement," one of them said. "Report of a leak." "There's no leak," Hank shouted, blocking the door. "Get lost." "Sir, if you don't let us in, we have to shut off the gas to the entire building." "City ordinance." Hank reluctantly let them in. The men, who were actually private security contractors hired by Reynolds, walked through the house. They didn't check the gas. They checked the occupants. They confirmed who was sleeping where. They took discreet photos of the damage, the wine stains on the rug, the broken vase, the general filth. When they left, they handed Hank a notice. "What is this?" Hank asked. "Notice of unauthorized occupants," the man said. "The lease for this property lists Diane Sterling and Greg Miller. Any guests staying longer than 48 hours must be registered. You have 3 unregistered adults living here. You're in violation of the occupancy code." Hank slammed the door. "Who does this management company think they are? The Gestapo?" "It's Diane," Loretta whispered. She was sitting on the sofa, looking pale. "She's doing this. She knows." "She doesn't know," Greg insisted, pacing the room like a caged animal. "She's in Japan. She sent a text about the car keys. She's just organized. She automated everything before she left." "We need money," Hank said. "Greg." "The pawn shop. Take the pearls." Greg looked at the stairs. "I can't. The safe is locked." "Break it," Hank roared. "Use a sledgehammer." "Who cares about the wall? We own the house anyway." I watched Greg run to the basement to get tools. My heart raced. If they physically destroyed the wall, that was destruction of property. Another charge to add to the list. Greg came back up with a crowbar and a heavy hammer. He went into the study. Whack! Whack! The sound of metal hitting plaster echoed through the audio feed. He was destroying my home. My father's study. But the safe was reinforced titanium, installed by my father to protect his most precious documents. Greg hid it for an hour. He chipped the paint. He put a hole in the drywall. But he couldn't get it open. Exhausted, sweating, and defeated, he threw the crowbar across the room. It smashed into a bookshelf, sending glass flying. "Useless!" Tiffany yelled from the doorway. "You are completely useless." "Shut up!" Greg screamed back, his face purple with rage. "I'm doing this for you." "You're doing nothing." Tiffany grabbed her purse. "I'm going to get some food. I have a stash of cash in my bag." "Share it," Loretta demanded. "No," Tiffany spat. "My baby needs to eat. You old leeches can starve." She stormed out. I smiled. The rats were turning on each other. The hunger was setting in. Wednesday brought a new player onto the board. My phone rang in the hotel room. I looked at the ID, Becky Miller. Greg's cousin. I hesitated. Becky was the black sheep of the Miller family because she was a single mom who worked 2 jobs as a waitress and refused to kiss Hank's ring. The family looked down on her, mocked her poverty, and excluded her from the high society events they attended on my dime. I answered cautiously. "Hello? Diane? It's Becky." Her voice sounded nervous. I saw on Facebook that you're in Japan, but I needed to call you. Is this international rates? I can make it quick. It's fine, Becky, I said. I'm using Wi-Fi calling. What's up? Look, I know we're not close, she started. But Greg called me an hour ago. My grip tightened on the phone. Oh. What did he want? He wanted to borrow money, Becky said. He asked me for $500. He said it was an emergency, that there was a banking glitch. Did you give it to him? Are you kidding? I don't have $500 to lend, Becky laughed bitterly. But that's not why I'm calling. Diane, he sounded desperate. And in the background, I heard a woman yelling. It wasn't you. I stayed silent. Diane, Becky continued, her voice lowering. Who is Tiffany? I took a deep breath. Becky had always been kind to me, in her rough around the edges way. She was the only one who thanked me when I gave the family Christmas gifts. Tiffany is his pregnant mistress, I said bluntly. Silence on the other end. Then a long, low whistle. That son of a bitch, Becky whispered. He's cheating on you? After everything you've done for that family? Not just cheating, Becky. They're trying to steal everything. They forged a power of attorney. They're living in my house right now, Greg, Hank, Loretta, and Tiffany, planning how to spend my money. They even talked about what would happen if I died. Oh my God, Becky gasped. Diane, you need to call the police. I am handling it, I said. But I need to know whose side you're on. Are you kidding? I hate them, Becky said with venom I hadn't expected. Do you know Greg borrowed $2,000 from me 5 years ago when my mom died? He said he needed it for investments. I found out later he bought a watch. He never paid me back. He watched me struggle to buy diapers for my kid while wearing my inheritance on his wrist. I didn't know that, I said softly. Of course not. They think I'm trash. But you treated me like a person, Diane. At the BBQs, you were the only one who asked about my son. Becky, I said, a plan forming. I need a favor. I need someone to confirm exactly who is in that house right now. I need a witness who isn't on my payroll. Would you go over there? Go over there? Pretend you're bringing them food. Bring a casserole or something. Say you heard Greg was having trouble and you wanted to help. They're starving, so they'll let you in. Just look around. See the damage. See Tiffany. And then, leave. I can do that, Becky said. I'd love to see them squirm. If you do this for me, I said, I will pay off your student loans. All of them. Diane, you don't have to. I want to, I said. Family looks out for family. And you are the only decent Miller left. 2 hours later, I watched on the camera as Becky arrived at the brownstone with a tray of lasagna. Greg opened the door, looking haggard. Becky? What are you doing here? I heard you were having a tough time, Becky said, pushing past him. Thought I'd bring dinner. The smell of food acted like a magnet. Hank and Loretta emerged from the living room. Tiffany waddled in from the kitchen. Who is this? Tiffany asked, eyeing Becky's worn coat. This is Cousin Becky, Loretta said dismissively, grabbing the lasagna. She's the help. Becky's eyes narrowed, but she kept her cool. She looked at Tiffany's stomach. She looked at the smashed wall in the study. She looked at the wine stains. So, Becky said, looking at Greg. This is the new arrangement? It's temporary, Greg mumbled, shoving lasagna into his mouth. Diane is transitioning out. Does she know she's transitioning out? Becky asked innocently. She will, Hank said, mouth full. Now get out, Becky. We don't need you sniffing around. Thanks for the food, Tiffany said, not even looking at her. Next time bring garlic bread. Becky walked to the door. Before she left, she looked directly at the potted plant where I had hidden the camera. She gave a tiny, imperceptible nod. She went to her car and called me. They are all there, she confirmed. The house is trashed. Greg looks like a junkie. Tiffany is wearing your clothes. And Hank. Hank told me that when they get your money, they're going to buy a boat and leave the country. Thank you, Becky, I said. You just gave me the final piece. Independent verification. Give them hell, Diane, Becky said. For all of us. I hung up. I looked at the calendar. It was Thursday. I was supposed to be in Japan until next week. But the Queen was coming home early. Friday morning. The sky was a brilliant, hard blue. The slush had frozen into gray ice on the sidewalks. I stood in the lobby of the hotel, checking my reflection. I wasn't wearing my usual practical work suits. I was wearing a black dress that cost more than Greg's car, a structured white coat, and killer heels. I looked like a widow who had just buried her husband and was on her way to collect the insurance money, which, in a way, I was. Mr. Reynolds was waiting for me outside in a black SUV. With him were two men who looked like they chewed rocks for breakfast, private security. And in the car behind us was a process server and a uniformed police officer Mr. Reynolds had coordinated with, citing the threat of domestic violence and the unauthorized occupants. Are you ready? Reynolds asked as I slid into the back seat. I've been ready for 5 years, I said. I just didn't know it. The drive to the Upper East Side was silent. I watched the city pass by, feeling a strange detachment. The Diane who cried in the car on Christmas Eve felt like a stranger. I was cold. I was sharp. I was deadly. We pulled up to the brownstone at 11 a.m. It was the perfect time. They would be awake, hungry, and hungover. I saw the curtains twitch. Someone was watching. Okay, Reynolds said. We go in fast. Security first to secure the room. Then us. Officer O'Malley stays at the door to prevent exit. I nodded. I pulled out my key, the master key. We walked up the steps in a phalanx. I could feel the eyes of the neighbors. Let them watch. They were about to see a show. I unlocked the door. The security guards pushed it open and stepped in, their presence filling the foyer. Clear, one of them said. I stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Stale alcohol, body odor, old food. My beautiful, lavender-scented home smelled like a frat house. Who the hell is that? Hank's voice roared from the living room. Greg. Someone broke in. Greg came running from the kitchen, holding a half-eaten bagel. He stopped dead when he saw the wall of muscle in his hallway. And then he saw me. His face went through a kaleidoscope of emotions, confusion. Fear. Recognition. Horror. Diane, he squeaked. You're in Tokyo. Hello, Greg, I said, my voice calm and echoing in the high-ceilinged hall. I caught an earlier flight. Turns out, the deal fell through. Just like your life. Loretta and Hank appeared behind him. Loretta gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Hank turned purple. And then, waddling out of the living room, curious about the noise, came Tiffany. She was wearing my white cashmere sweater, now stained with coffee, and clutching her belly. She stopped when she saw me. She looked at Greg. She looked at the police officer behind me. Who is this? Tiffany asked, though she knew. I'm the landlord, I said, taking a step forward. And you are trespassing. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of my heels clicking on the hardwood floor as I walked into the center of the room. I looked around at the destruction. The hole in the wall. The shattered vase. The filth. I looked at them. My family. Surprise, I said, no emotion in my eyes. Merry Christmas. The shock in the room was a physical force. It sucked the air out of their lungs. For a moment, nobody moved. They were a tableau of guilt, Greg trembling in his boxers and a t-shirt, Loretta in a stained robe, Hank looking like a cornered rat, and Tiffany, the pregnant mistress, wearing my clothes in my house. Greg was the first to break. His instinct for self-preservation kicked in, but his brain was misfiring. Diane, he stammered, taking a step toward me, his hands up in a placating gesture. This isn't what it looks like. This is Tiffany. She's a cousin. A distant cousin from Ohio. She had nowhere to go, and she's pregnant, and you know how charitable you are, so I thought. Stop, I said. I didn't shout. I didn't have to. The word cut through his babbling like a guillotine. She's a cousin? I repeated, raising an eyebrow. Is that why she's wearing my cashmere sweater? Is that why she's living in my condo on the west side under a fake lease? Is that why you announced to your parents on Christmas Eve that she was carrying your son? Greg's mouth opened and closed like a fish on dry land. You heard that? I heard everything, Greg. Christmas Eve. The toast. The Miller heir. The plan to get me to sign the power of attorney. Loretta let out a strangled sob. She knows. Oh my God, she knows everything. I know more than that, I said, turning my gaze to Hank. He shrank back under my stare. I know about the accident you were planning for me. The brakes? The carbon monoxide? The $5 million life insurance policy? Hank's face turned from purple to ash gray. That was just talk. We were drunk. We didn't mean it. The police can decide what you meant, I said, gesturing to Officer O'Malley at the door. Tiffany suddenly stepped forward. She was young, entitled, and clearly didn't understand the gravity of the situation. She looked me up and down with a sneer. So you're Diane, she said, crossing her arms over my sweater. Greg said you were plain, but he didn't say you were a bitch. Look, I'm pregnant with his son. This house is going to be ours anyway. Why don't you just sign the papers and leave? You can't keep a man who doesn't want you. I looked at her. I felt a flash of pity for the child she was carrying, but zero pity for her. You poor, stupid girl, I said softly. You think he wants you? He wants the money. My money. And guess what? The money is gone. What? Tiffany looked at Greg. Greg is broke, Tiffany, I said, addressing her but watching him. He has no job. He's been living off my salary and stealing my rental income to gamble online. He has debt. Massive debt. And as of 3 days ago, he has no access to any of my accounts. That's a lie. Tiffany screamed at Greg. Tell her she's lying. You said you were a traitor. You said you had millions. Greg put his head in his hands. I was going to make it back. I had a system. He's a gambling addict, I continued, twisting the knife. And this house? It's mine. Inherited property. He owns nothing. If I divorce him today, which I am, he leaves with the clothes on his back. Actually, those are my clothes too, since I paid for them. Tiffany turned on Greg, her fists flying. She started hitting him in the chest. You liar. You loser. You promised me. I left my parents for you. Get off me. Greg shoved her away. Enough. Mr. Reynolds stepped forward, his voice booming. This is a circus. Officer, please remove the trespassers. You can't kick us out. Loretta shrieked, clutching the sofa. We've lived here for 12 years. We have squatters' rights. Mr. Reynolds smiled, pulling a document from his briefcase. Actually, Mrs. Miller, you are guests. And your guest privileges have been revoked due to credible threats of violence against the homeowner. We have an emergency protective order granted by a judge this morning. You have 30 minutes to gather your personal effects and leave. Anything left behind will be put on the curb. 30 minutes? Hank yelled. Where are we supposed to go? I don't care, I said. Go to a hotel. Go to a shelter. Go to hell. Just get out of my house. And you, I pointed at Greg. You're staying. We have business. Greg looked hopeful for a second. Diane, we can talk? You want to work this out? No, I said coldly. I want you to sign the divorce papers. Now. While the police are watching. And if I don't? Greg tried to muster some defiance. I pulled up my phone and hit play on the recording from yesterday. Hank's voice, we could tamper with the brakes, carbon monoxide. Greg's voice, 5 million, that would set us up for life. I stopped the recording. If you don't sign everything, giving up all claims to my assets, all alimony, and accepting full responsibility for the stolen $280,000, I hand this recording to the district attorney. You and your parents will go to prison for conspiracy to commit murder. Attempted insurance fraud. Grand larceny. I leaned in close to his face. Sign the papers, Greg. And you might stay a free man. Don't sign, and you'll be someone's girlfriend in Rikers Island by tonight. Greg looked at his parents. They were terrified. They were shaking their heads, silently begging him to save them. He looked at Tiffany. She was leaning against the wall, sobbing, realizing her golden ticket was a fraud. He looked at me. And he saw the end. I'll sign, he whispered. The next 30 minutes were a blur of chaotic justice. The security guard stood over Hank and Loretta as they frantically shoved clothes into garbage bags. There was no dignity left. Loretta tried to take the silver candlesticks. Put it back, the guard barked. It's mine, she lied. It's stamped with the Sterling family crest, I said from the doorway. Drop it, Loretta. Or I add theft to the charges. She dropped it with a clang, glaring at me with pure hatred. You ungrateful brat. We raised you. We loved you. You loved my bank account, I corrected her. You hated me. You spat on my mother's photo. I saw it on the camera. Don't talk to me about love. She flinched as if I had slapped her. She realized then that there were no secrets left. I had seen behind the curtain. Tiffany was the first to leave. She dragged her Louis Vuitton suitcase down the stairs, cursing everyone. I hope you all rot, she screamed at Greg. Don't ever call me. I'm getting an abortion. Tiffany, wait. Greg called out weakly, but he was stuck at the dining table, pen hovering over the divorce settlement Reynolds had laid out. Sign it, Greg, Reynolds said. Page 4. Initial here. Sign here. Greg signed. His hand shook so badly the signature was barely legible, but it was legal. With every stroke of the pen, he stripped himself of any claim to my life. He admitted to the debt. He waived spousal support. He walked away with nothing but his gambling debt. Done, Reynolds said, snatching the papers away. Now, get out. Greg stood up. He looked small. He looked like the pathetic, weak man he had always been, stripped of the power I had given him. Diane, he said, tears streaming down his face. I'm sorry. I got lost. The gambling, the pressure. I just wanted to be enough for you. Don't, I said, holding up a hand. Don't insult my intelligence with your pity party. You didn't want to be enough for me. You wanted to replace me. You wanted me dead so you could be rich with her. I never wanted you dead, he protested. That was Dad talking. And you didn't stop him, I said. You listened. You calculated. You're worse than him, Greg. He's an open wolf. You're a snake in the grass. Officer O'Malley stepped forward. Time to go, sir. Greg walked to the door. Hank and Loretta were waiting on the sidewalk, surrounded by black trash bags. Neighbors were watching from their windows. The shame was public. The humiliation was total. As Greg walked out the door, I called out to him one last time. Greg? He turned, hope flickering in his eyes. I changed the locks an hour ago, I said. Don't try the key. I slammed the heavy oak door in his face. I heard the lock click. I stood in the foyer. The house was quiet. It was dirty, it smelled bad, and there was a hole in the wall. But it was mine. Finally, truly mine. I slumped against the door and slid to the floor. The adrenaline crashed. I didn't cry. I just started to laugh. A low, hysterical laugh that bubbled up from my chest. I had done it. I had faced the monsters and I had won. Mr. Reynolds came over and offered me a hand. You did good, kid. James would be proud. I need a drink, I said, standing up. But not the champagne. They drank it all. I think, Reynolds said, checking his watch, we can afford to buy a new bottle. And then, we need to call a cleaning crew. This place needs to be exorcised. Burn the sheets, I said. Burn the rug. Burn everything they touched. The physical eviction was just the first battle. The war continued in the courtroom for the next 2 months, but it was a massacre. With the signed settlement and the recorded evidence of criminal conspiracy, Greg didn't stand a chance. He tried to hire a lawyer, but as soon as the lawyer heard the tapes and saw the settlement Greg had already signed, he dropped the case. You have no case, Mr. Miller, I imagined the lawyer saying. You signed a confession. We filed the divorce decree. It was finalized in record time. Greg was ordered to repay the $280,000 he had embezzled. Since he had no money, the court garnered his wages. But he has no wages, I told Reynolds. He will, Reynolds said. The court ordered him to seek employment immediately or face jail time for contempt. He can't play day trader anymore. We also went after Hank and Loretta for the damage to the house. The hole in the wall, the ruined furniture, the missing items they had managed to smuggle out over the years. We sued them for $50,000 in damages. They countersued, claiming I had promised them life tenancy. It was a joke. Reynolds destroyed them in court with a single document, a lease agreement they had signed 10 years ago, which I had forgotten about, that listed them as at-will tenants. They lost. They were ordered to pay. They had to sell their car, Hank's precious vintage Cadillac he had bought with the last of his buyout money years ago, to pay the judgment. I didn't stop there. I contacted the IRS. I believe there may be some irregularities in my ex-husband's tax filings, I told the agent. He claimed to be a professional trader with significant losses, but he was using stolen funds. An audit was launched against Greg and his parents. It turned out Hank hadn't paid taxes on his consulting income, under-the-table construction jobs, for years. The system came down on them like a ton of bricks. It wasn't just me getting revenge, it was the consequences of a lifetime of cutting corners catching up to them all at once. Meanwhile, I started the process of reclaiming my life. I hired a contractor to repair the brownstone. I threw out every piece of furniture Greg or his parents had sat on. I painted the walls. I replaced the carpets. I wanted to erase their DNA from my sanctuary. One afternoon, while overseeing the painters, I got a call from Becky. "You won't believe this," she said, sounding glee. "Tiffany moved back in with her parents in Ohio. But get this, she's suing Greg for paternity." "Good luck to her getting blood from a stone," I said. "And Greg?" Becky laughed. "He's working at a car wash in Queens." I saw him. He was wiping down tires. He looked old. And Hank and Loretta? They're living in a one-bedroom basement apartment in the Bronx. Loretta is working as a greeter at a Walmart. Hank is trying to get disability, but they denied him. "Justice," I said. "It's poetic," Becky agreed. "By the way, I got the letter from the bank. My student loans, they're paid in full." "Diane." I don't know what to say. "Don't say anything," I said. "Just live a good life. Break the Miller cycle." "I will," she promised. Winter turned into spring. The snow melted, revealing the grime underneath, which was then washed away by the rain. I sold the condos. All of them. Even the ones Greg hadn't ruined. I didn't want to be a landlord anymore. I didn't want the hassle. I put the money into a managed index fund that I didn't have to look at every day. I kept the brownstone for a while, thinking I could reclaim it. But the ghosts were too loud. Every time I walked into the kitchen, I saw Loretta sneering at me. Every time I went into the study, I saw Greg trying to break into the safe. I realized I couldn't heal in the place where I was wounded. So, I put the brownstone on the market. It sold in a week to a nice young couple with a baby. They walked in and talked about how much love they felt in the house. I smiled. They brought their own love. The house was just a shell, the energy inside was what you made it. On my last day in New York, I went to the car wash in Queens. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to see it with my own eyes to believe the monster was truly slain. I parked my new car across the street. I saw him. Greg. He was wearing a blue jumpsuit that was too big for him. He was scrubbing the rims of an SUV. He looked thin. His hair was thinning. He looked like a man defeated by life. His manager yelled something at him, and Greg flinched, nodding quickly, scrubbing harder. The arrogance was gone. The swagger of the day trader was gone. He was just a guy trying to make rent. I felt a strange sensation. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't even hate. It was indifference. He was just a stranger. A stranger who had occupied my life for too long. I rolled up my window and drove away. I didn't honk. I didn't wave. I just left him in my rearview mirror, shrinking until he disappeared. I stopped by the cemetery on my way out of town. I visited my parents' grave. "I handled it, Dad," I whispered, touching the cold stone. "I protected the legacy. I took out the trash." The wind rustled the trees, and for a moment, I felt a warmth on my shoulder. "I'm leaving now," I told them. "I'm going to find my own life. Not the one you built, not the one Greg tried to steal. Mine." I thought it was over, but narcissists never let go easily. A week before I was set to move to Denver, my phone rang. Unknown number. I usually ignored them, but I was expecting a call from the movers. "Hello? Diane?" The voice was ragged, desperate. It was Greg. "How did you get this number?" I asked, my hand hovering over the end call button. "I changed it. I called Becky. She wouldn't give it to me, but I stole it from her phone when I visited. You stole from your cousin too? You really don't change, Greg. Diane, please. Don't hang up. I heard you sold the house. I heard you're leaving. That's none of your business. I miss you, he sobbed. It sounded pathetic. I made a mistake. A huge mistake. Tiffany, she was nothing. She tricked me. She trapped me. She didn't trap you, Greg. You invited her in. You plotted with her to kill me. I was weak. My dad, he pressured me. You know how he is. You're a grown man, Greg. Stop blaming your daddy. Diane, look. I'm suffering. I'm living in a flop house. I'm scrubbing cars. Is this what you wanted? To see me destroyed? Yes, I said honestly. It is. How can you be so cruel? He cried. We were married. We were family. We were never family, I said. I was your host. You were the parasite. And now the host has taken the medicine. I have nothing, he screamed. Can't you send me a little money? Just to get back on my feet? 5,000? That's nothing to you now. I laughed. I actually laughed. Greg, I said. You owe me $280,000. Every paycheck you earn for the rest of your life will be docked to pay me back. You are working for me now. So, get back to scrubbing those tires. I need my check. You bitch, he screamed. You cold-hearted. I hung up. I blocked the number. That conversation didn't upset me. It validated me. It proved that he hadn't learned anything. He wasn't sorry for what he did, he was sorry he got caught. He was sorry he was poor. It was the final closure I didn't know I needed. It severed the last thread of guilt I might have felt. He was unfixable. And he was no longer my problem. Moving to Denver was a shock to the system. The air was thinner, the people were nicer, and the mountains were omnipresent reminders of how small our problems really are. I bought a small house. Not a brownstone. Not a mansion. A cottage with a wraparound porch and a big yard. I started gardening. Me, the city girl who used to think nature was something you looked at through a window. I bought gloves, a shovel, and rose bushes. There is something healing about digging in the dirt. You tear up the weeds. You prepare the soil. You plant something fragile and you nurture it. And if you do it right, it blooms. I spent my days consulting remotely for a few select clients, on my terms, at my rates. I spent my afternoons hiking. I spent my evenings reading books I actually liked, not books Greg thought made us look smart. I made friends. Real friends. Not people who wanted my money, but people who liked my dry sense of humor and my lasagna, which I finally learned to cook. I met a woman named Sarah at a pottery class. She was divorced too. We bonded over wine and horror stories about our exes. When I told her my story, she didn't look at my jewelry, she looked at me with respect. You're a survivor, she said. You're a warrior. I'm just Diane, I said. And for the first time, that was enough. I didn't date. Not for a long time. I wasn't ready to trust. And that was okay. I learned to date myself. I took myself to dinner. I bought myself flowers. I learned that being alone is not the same as being lonely. Being alone in peace is better than being together in a war zone. One day, 6 months after I arrived, I received a letter from Mr. Reynolds. Diane, just wanted to update you. Hank passed away last week. Heart attack. Loretta is moving into a state-run facility. Greg is still at the car wash, but he's behind on his payments to you. We're filing a motion to seize his tax return. Hope the mountains are treating you well. Best, Reynolds. I put the letter down. Hank was dead. The architect of my misery was gone. I felt nothing. No joy, no sadness. Just a quiet acknowledgement that the universe has a way of balancing the scales. I took the letter outside to my fire pit. I lit a match and watched it burn. The smoke curled up into the clear Colorado sky, disappearing instantly. So, here I am. 3 years later. I'm sitting on my porch, drinking coffee from a mug that says Boss Lady, a gag gift from Becky, who visits me once a year with her son. My roses are in full bloom. The red ones are my favorite. They remind me of my mother's lipstick. I think about my parents often. For a long time, I thought their legacy was the money. The burden of the wealth that made me a target. I resented it. I wished I was poor so I could be sure people loved me for me. But I realized something. The money didn't save me. I saved me. My parents left me something more valuable than the portfolio. They left me my father's analytical mind. They left me my mother's grace under pressure. They left me the example of a partnership based on respect, which helped me recognize, eventually, that what I had with Greg was a sham. The money was just a tool. The weapon was my spine. I know there are women out there listening to this who are where I was. Maybe you're sitting in a house that feels cold despite the heating. Maybe you're looking at a husband who smiles too much with his mouth and not enough with his eyes. Maybe you feel like an imposter in your own life, tiptoeing around people who should be carrying you. Listen to me. Trust your gut. That nausea you feel? That's not the flu. That's your intuition screaming at you to run. Don't ignore the red flags just because you're afraid of being alone. Don't sign the papers just to keep the peace. Peace built on lies isn't peace, it's a ceasefire waiting to be broken. I lost my family. I lost the future I thought I was going to have. I lost the naive girl who thought love conquers all. But look what I gained. I gained my freedom. I gained my dignity. I gained a life where I don't have to count the silverware after guests leave. And most importantly, I learned that I am unbreakable. They tried to bury me. They didn't know I was a seed. Thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to tell, but it felt good to say it out loud. If you enjoyed this, or if you've ever had to fight for what was yours, please give this video a like. Share it with a friend who might need a wake-up call. And subscribe to the channel for more stories of truth and justice. And to Greg, if you're listening to this on your break at the car wash, get back to work. You still owe me 200 grand. This is Diane, signing off. Take care of yourselves, ladies. And remember, check the bank accounts. Diane's journey is more than just a tale of justice, it is a profound testament to the unyielding strength of the human spirit. Watching her transform from a victim of deceit into the architect of her own freedom teaches us a vital lesson. True value is not defined by how others treat us, but by the boundaries we refuse to compromise. Resilience is not merely enduring pain, it is having the courage to walk away from toxicity, even when it wears the mask of family. We often fear the unknown of starting over, but as we've seen, solitude is far better than a crowded room of lies. Protecting your peace is an act of radical self-love, and rebuilding your life is the ultimate victory. If this story inspired you to recognize your own worth and reminded you that it's never too late to choose yourself, please share your thoughts or simply comment good below. Let's support each other in living with dignity and strength.